This is a webcast for Modern European History, the Imperialism Unit, SI number 7. Following this webcast, you'll be asked to take an online quiz. The quiz will make sure that you are gathering the information that is necessary for SI number 7. The quiz will be located on Canvas, and so you will take the quiz electronically. I suggest as I'm going through this SI7 PowerPoint that you pause and stop and write information down. Certainly if you see it, you should write it down and also include any relevant comments that I might make that you think are pertinent. Anything presented here in the webcast is testable on the quiz. So let's get started. I want to start with a series of maps here. You can see in the title, these maps are outlining the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was a subject that we touched on in first semester. This was a global conflict. Some have even said maybe the first world war was fought in the 7 Years' War. But this is a conflict principally between Britain and France. You might remember that the 7 Years' War in the United States history is called the French and Indian War, where the French and Indians allied against the British and the British colonists that had been living in the 13 colonies along the East Coast. The point of this war was to see who would control North America. Of course, one of the consequences of this war, due to its expense, the British government raised taxes on the colonists, and of course that inspired the American Revolution later. But I want to draw our attention here to India. Part of the 7 Years' War campaign between France and Great Britain is for control over India. And the reason being is that there were a tremendous amount of commercial interest, raw goods, marketplace to sell manufactured goods in India. So it was seen as a potential commercial enterprise that would reap tremendous amount of profits. So throughout the 1700s, you do see competition and rivalry between the two dominant powers of the time, France and Great Britain, for access to the commercial dollars in India. And of course, the 7 Years' War, that's what this refers to, a 7 Years' War, which ended in 1763 with the British victory over France, pretty much removed France from any type of obstacle to British enterprise in the subcontinent of India. The main commercial interest that was trying to make money and also part of the governing apparatus in India was the British East India Company. So it both had a commercial and a political role in India. And you can see in this quote, the British East India Company had some moral and cultural interests. At least they suggested that one of their endeavors was to foster a class of persons in India, blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions and morals, and in intellect. And this is pretty classic of the imperialism era, in which it's seen by Europeans and European groups, such as the British East India Company here, that there is a cultural or an ideological motive to bring the British culture into India. But of course, for the British East India Company, the most important thing that they were trying to acquire is profit and making money. So throughout India, you had British East India Company warehouses and trading posts. Here in this map, you can see these pink shaded areas show the territory in India that was kind of dominated and controlled by the British East India Company. And of course, it's along the coasts primarily, and then also up in northern India. And it's in these areas where They were trying to uh, use cheap labor, raw materials, of course, ports, importing and exporting to try to generate as much profit as possible. The British East India Company is a commercial enterprise and not very suitable and equipped for political governing. And uh, as they showed a weakness to keep a control over the people and the the place of India, more and more British governing institutions were created to be able to um, begin to protect commercial interests. An interesting event occurs in 1857. It's called the Sepoy Rebellion. You can see here that the word Sepoy, which is a Hindu word, um, is translated into us for us, an Indian soldier in the British Army. So it was very common for the British East India Company, as well as some of these governing institutions that were coming online, to employ native Indian, and when I say native Indian, I mean people that are living in India, born there. It's their nation of origin. Uh, Begin to use them as laborers, and in this case, use them as soldiers. Uh, Certainly, the British would be the minority in number, and so they would need to be able to build a military force using the local inhabitants. These sepoy soldiers certainly weren't seen as equals within the British Army. As you can see here, they were paid less than a British soldier in India. There was also other cultural conflicts, such as pressure to adopt the British uh, preference of Christianity. And of course, this becomes an affront to those Indians who were Hindus or Muslims, um, not wanting to convert. And in 1857, you have a mutiny of these sepoy soldiers, and it's often identified as the spark of this mutiny when new rifles were being issued to the soldiers. These rifles had magazine cartridges. This would be the ammunition, the bullets for the guns, were greased and packaged in fat from cows and pigs. And the idea here is that you would have to rip the package with your mouth to be able to feed the ammunition into these these rifles. And for a Hindu who sees a cow as sacred, or for a Muslim to see pigs as unclean, touching and biting and interacting with this um, greased cartridge in this way was completely offensive. And so it's kind of a last straw event in which soldiers used their weapons and began to fight back against the British soldiers. And of course, the British Army responded with force, and we have soldiers and villages being wiped out during this rebellion, and control put back into British hands. The Sepoy Rebellion showed clearly that the British East India Company was unable to control India. And so at this point, that company is removed from power, kind of disbands, and the British Parliament takes formal control of India. This is what we call the Raj. The Raj is a term that just simply means British Empire in India. I have a little YouTube that you can type in if you're curious. It's an animated film of the Sepoy Rebellion. It's only a couple minutes long, and it might give you some interesting visual perspective of this important Sepoy Rebellion. This is what India will come to look like once the British Parliament takes control and instead of having kind of coastal port control like the British East India Company had, now the whole subcontinent of India is under the authority, the governing authority of the British Parliament back in the United Kingdom. You can see here the map is 1914. So India is under the dominion of Great Britain for some time. This term, the crown jewel of the British Empire, is a term that was repeated often during the age of imperialism. Um, the British Empire was vast. This gives you a sense of the British Empire. You can see everything in red is being identified as territory that the British had. Here is India in Southeast Asia, and it was identified that India was the greatest treasure within the entire British realm. And that is, of course, because of the financial profit-making opportunities that were to be found in India. And so what happened during this age of the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s and into the mid 1900s is that young British men who want to make something of themselves would often go to India. A lot of times they were inspired by the quest for adventure, wanting to see something of the world, more of a frontier, and certainly have an opportunity to be able to make some wealth and maybe even return back to Great Britain very wealthy so that they could retire. What this started to create was a divided society. So you definitely have a superior mentality complex with the British who came into India. And they start to dominate this society. Indians become subservient and start taking on certain roles that is providing some type of service to those British citizens that were in India, and they're controlling and administering the country. And of course, anytime you have a group of people, particularly local inhabitants, who are placed in an inferior position, the idea of rebellion starts to come out into their hearts and their minds and their actions. What they want most of all is a freedom and independence from foreign rule. So we see a Indian nationalism start to percolate, and the Indian National Congress was formed in 1885, and this is one of several groups that will start to agitate and try to bring about a political solution here where the British would be removed from power and India would be returned to be run and controlled by the natural-born citizens of India. So in a divided society, of course, it's going to have certain attitudes of superiority versus inferiority. And the way that the Brits looked upon the Indians, they really saw the Indian culture as something, of course, very foreign, but also they saw it as backwards and ignorant, something that needed to be changed, and particularly changed with a Western or an English culture. So we have a strong British influence in the country with the goals of trying to help develop the country, to westernize it. And of course, from the British perspective, they felt like this was the right cause. They felt like they had the moral authority to go in and start to develop an economy, a capitalistic economy, and start to increase the prosperity in India through economics and trade, try to raise the standard of living, and of course to try to bring enlightenment to the Indian people. This enlightenment would be by adopting Western traditions and cultures, not just religious, but it could be dress, it could be literacy. You start to see the oncoming of schools and universities in India. Of course, technological advancement and innovations becomes part of also the British effort to enlighten the people. So, in some ways, when you look at India today, it has a very strong British or English Western stamp to it, and of course, those are the long-term effects of the British control of India. Um, but there is some irony and some tension here. You can see the John Stuart Mill quote says that despotism is a legitimate mode of government in dealing with barbarians. Certainly, Indians living in India would be called barbarians, provided the end, right, the results be to their improvement. I noticed that John Stuart Mill is speaking as a liberal. If you remember, liberals from first semester wanted change, and some of the things that they pressed for most was democracy, consent of the governed, voting rights, even gender equality. And so here, he's actually suggesting that despotism, absolutism, is okay as long as it brings about um, the development of improvement for the people of India. So you can see, wow, what a tension between the liberal ideals and the practice of a very conservative despotism governing type of mentality there. Quite a paradox. And of course, the people in India really aren't favoring the despotism or really desiring the English um, effort to control the country and to um, dominate and to bring about Western culture. There's going to be a strong backlash towards those efforts. If you take a look at this photo, you can kind of see the subservient uh, style of life. Here you have a man who's English, and he's being waved by this big fan, cooled in the hot, humid air, and this gentleman has given him a pedicure. So these are kind of a classic image here that just kind of shows you how there were different tiers of life, and certainly the British officials that were in India were on the dominant side of that hierarchy. There's two people I want to introduce to you that are part of this history and and make great names for themselves and become kind of influential in this story of India. Rudyard Kipling is a man who was born in India. His parents were from Britain but had moved to India, and shortly after they moved there, Rudyard was born. And he grew up in India. He'll later leave and be educated, um, and then and come back. Actually, kind of travels all over the world. But India was pivotal for Rudyard Kipling in his growing up, and you may be familiar with the Jungle Book series. Of course, Disney made a popular Jungle Book film that was inspired by Rudyard Kipling's books. So Rudyard Kipling is uh, probably the greatest English writer of the time. He was a huge celebrity. This is before TV and movies and radio. So books being a major entertainment source, his name was widely known, and just he helped kind of capture the European mind with the kind of the sights and the sounds and characters that he created in his Jungle Book series. Those books really help to inspire an adventuristic call for people to be able to go to India and kind of explore it and experience it. So he played an important role in the age of imperialism, and we'll talk about a poem that he wrote called "The White Man's Burden" in a future SI. The second character that I want to address here is Mohandas Gandhi. It's likely you've heard of Gandhi before and seen his picture. Here you can see Mohandas Gandhi, wearing a very classic Western suit. He was born in India, uh, was educated at the university level in London, so he was very westernized because of the influence of Britain in his home country. But later would return to India, and of course you can see here kind of living according to the traditional fashions. He would break away from the westernization influences that he grew up with, and he becomes a pivotal figure in the quest for India to break away and become a self-governing independent nation, because of the leadership and the nonviolent protest tactics that Gandhi utilized to try to agitate and remove British authority in India. I love this quote here. Gandhi saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, then you win. And the whole point here is emphasizing the non-violent strategies he used to be able to remove Great Britain's authority. Once he and others supporting Indian rule were beat down upon and sustaining violence from British authorities, that his non-violent response was uh, a strong tactic that brought about this Indian independence. So he's quite a hero and quite a figure in history that I wanted you to connect with this storyline.